Could you imagine what a Yonko crew could do with the information inside Punk records? Now that we know Vegapunk is making his way off Egghead Island one way or another, assuming he doesn't die by the hands of CP0 before then, I have to imagine that there's a long line of pirates just waiting to sign the old scientist for hire to a nice fat contract, since he's obviously gone where the money is throughout his career. Especially if they can look through all that information themselves, sort of like how Pudding does with her Memo no Mi, and I think her recent reintroduction of the story gives us a big hint to where the rest of the Egghead arc might be going. But before we get into it, I just want to give a big thank you to everyone for helping me hit 10,000 subscribers right here on YouTube. And hopefully we aren't done yet, so please drop a like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. But anyway, on to the theory. In chapter 1067, Vegapunk explained how the massive Punk Records is actually his brain, and how 6 clones all upload information to it once per day. That means that the knowledge inside of Punk Records has to be immense, and probably contains a number of different secrets, either regarding devil fruits, the ancient history, or how to even beat seraphims, which is all vital information for some of the pirates vying for the One Piece. And interestingly enough, we even saw Vegapunk ask the Straw Hats for a ride away from the island, and potentially away from Punk Records. Unless he can take it with him, which I'll talk more about in a second. But we also know that CP0 is meant to kill Vegapunk while they're here at Egghead. And if Vegapunk did escape with the crew, then leaving with Punk Records would definitely pose a challenge. I mean, maybe he has some built-in way to transport it, or maybe Caribou can do his thing since he should still be around the island somewhere. But even if either of those happened, keeping it safe long-term on the Sunny like he was able to do at Egghead is going to be very difficult. He can't leave it with Caribou forever, and Punk Records is way too big to fit on the Sunny or anything. So that all begs the question of what's going to happen with Punk Records after the culmination of the Egghead arc. If Vegapunk did die in this arc by the hands of CP0, then I assume the brain in Punk Records would soon just cease to exist since, you know, it's his brain and everything and he'd be dead. And his fruit would also leave his body, which means he shouldn't even have that big of a brain anymore. But let's leave that discussion for another time. But if we assume that Vegapunk does get away with the crew, then I think they definitely need to find some place to leave his brain permanently. And only in One Piece do we have to wonder how a pirate crew is going to safely transport a giant brain. But one group that still needs to get involved with Egghead is Sword, because we just saw Helmeppo beg to get a Seraphim from what they claimed was the nearby Egghead Island in order to help get Kobe back from Blackbeard. But we know that CP0 is already on Egghead, which makes me think that this is the perfect time for the inevitable clash between CP0 and Sword. And that's something that I think most of the fan base knew was coming at some point. I mean, CP0's true name is Cypherpole Aegis Zero, and Aegis means shield, which is a perfect inversion of Sword, since Cypherpole protects the interest of the world government. And we've even had a few other hints about this conflict, like when Drake and Guernica had this interesting exchange about Drake's true alliance during the raid, as well as some film red stuff that seems to hint that a future Sword and CP0 clash is inevitable. With most of CP0 here in Egghead, it seems like a natural place for that conflict to finally take place, particularly because it would be over Kobe and the Straw Hats. If Sword were to arrive looking for a Seraphim so that they can go and help Kobe, there is no way that they'd stop what they're doing and agree with CP0 to help fight Vegapunk or the Straw Hats. I mean, they wouldn't want to normally, but in this circumstance with Kobe in need of their help, I especially don't think that they'd waste any time or energy fighting these people, because they'd probably need Vegapunk's help to get the Seraphim in the first place, and the Straw Hats would definitely be willing to help get Kobe back if they asked. So why would Sword waste their energy fighting who are really their allies? And I'm not even sure that CP0 and the world government have any interest in getting Kobe back at all, since he's just a single Marine, and Akainu probably hates his guts, especially if Hibari ends up being his daughter and she actually has a thing for Kobe, as many people have brought up. And it's not even like Kobe has an important devil fruit that they'd want to retrieve anyway. So to most of the Marines other than Sword and Garp, Kobe's hostage situation is probably just not that important, which is a really interesting comparison to Whitebeard if you think about it. Look how much work he put in to just get one of his sons back, and how many other Whitebeard pirates backed him up. If CP0 really tells Sword to take down the people who are most likely to help get Kobe back, there is no way that they're gonna listen. So it feels like a natural start to that intergovernmental conflict, and having that divide within the world world government officially start because of Luffy and Kobe's relationship would just be peak Oda in my opinion. And don't forget that Vegapunk has connections to Kobe too. After Enies Lobby, Kobe told us all these good things about Vegapunk and how great he was, so I think it's safe to assume that they met at some point. And with Kobe and Vegapunk being the good guys that they are, I have a feeling that Vegapunk would have some interest in helping Kobe be safe. But we have to keep in mind who has Kobe right now, and that's Blackbeard, who definitely has some type of plan with him because we know how far Blackbeard plans in advance. And we obviously need to still get the conclusion of his fight with Law before he can get involved in any of this, but I think we can all agree that regardless of how that fight ends, Blackbeard isn't going anywhere until Luffy has a crack at him, so we can just assume that any ideas about Blackbeard that I'm bringing up here will just happen after the Law fight concludes, since Blackbeard's definitely going to come out alive and everything, even if Law does manage to escape or hurt him or anything like that. But since Blackbeard is basically an evil genius, I've been racking my brain for some reason that Blackbeard would want Kobe specifically. He could be trying to just sell him to the Cross Guild to get some money, or maybe bargain with the world government again for some type of resources, which are definitely all possible. But I think the dynamics of the situation changed a lot when we learned about Pudding's kidnapping, because we have to keep in mind that the Captain Kobe incident on Amazon Lily was a few weeks before our current point in the story on Egghead, which is even before the raid on Onigashima started. And Pudding's kidnapping probably happened somewhere around then, since most of the big mom pirates were seemingly still out of the country in the cover story. So that makes me think that getting Pudding and getting Boa's fruit were both planned ahead of time, but were separate things that probably occurred almost simultaneously, which is backed up by the fact that we saw different small groups of Blackbeard pirates at each of these locations, and now those same groups are together at Winter Island with Law, which likely means that both Pudding and Boa's fruit were essential to whatever Blackbeard's total plan is. And since he obviously left Amazon Lily without Boa's fruit, maybe he's trying to use Kobe to somehow fill the void for what he had planned with Boa's fruit. So in other words, maybe he thinks he can exchange Kobe for something that mimics whatever he was going to use Boa's fruit for. And what could that exchange possibly be for? Well, that's where Pudding comes in. See, many have theorized that Blackbeard wanted her for her third eye abilities, which is totally possible, but she hasn't even awakened that third eye yet, so if reading the poneglyphs is his goal, I feel like Robin would have been a much easier get since she can actually read them for sure. So I think the third eye is a bit of a red herring, especially since there are other third eye people in the world, and it's actually her memory fruit that Blackbeard wanted, which shouldn't be a surprise since Blackbeard is Oda's devil fruit guy. He has multiple devil fruits already, all of his crew has fruits, and he's been hunting specific ones for a while. So using Pudding for her fruit shouldn't really be that much of a surprise. So let's say that Blackbeard has some marine hostages, like Kobe or maybe even a past Roger pirate, and then he used Pudding's fruit on them. He would get all sorts of intel and maybe even the location of Laughtail, since the Roger pirates have been there and they probably know that information. And Blackbeard could have Pudding use her abilities on Kobe, which would then reveal his connection to Luffy, which could very well be what ultimately ties this Blackbeard and Kobe stuff right into the Straw Hats and Egghead. But first, I think we need to answer why Blackbeard wanted Boa's fruit originally and what he thinks he could possibly be trading Kobe for to mimic those abilities. Well, what if instead of Boa's actual fruit, he gets all of the information he needs to replicate the same effect, like what is probably the greatest resource on devil fruit information in existence, which might actually be this green line video from my boy Hidden Island, so I'm gonna leave a link to this down below. But what I'm really talking about is Vegapunk's brain, also known as Punk Records. If he is able to get his hands on Punk Records as well as have Pudding's powers at his disposal, he would have access to almost everything that there is to know about devil fruits, including how to clone them and maybe even how to reverse devil fruit effects due to the lineage factor or what have you. Like if he planned to use Boa's fruit to undo a certain rock statue like Rox D. Zebek, who might actually just be Stronger the Horse, by the way, and I know that sounds insane, but just trust me and go check out this video from Parvision and have your mind blown. But Blackbeard could use the information from Vegapunk's brain to either reverse a potential rock statue or to just turn other people to stone and then steal their information, which may have just been his plan all along with Boa and Pudding. I'm not saying this is definitely it or anything, but it just would make a lot of sense if he just wanted to turn people to stone and then read their their minds to get the information, like top government officials, Robin, or the Roger Pirates as I mentioned earlier. And Blackbeard literally had Boa held by her neck, so he may just have some of her hair and thus some of her lineage factor to use to replicate those abilities. And the idea that Blackbeard would get a bargaining chip to exchange with the government for something should not come as any kind of surprise at this point. He originally planned to do it with Luffy, but then did it with Ace, and that's how he originally became a warlord, and then he tried to do it again over the time skip with Bonnie, but Akainu came and ruined the deal. And CP0's comment about how Bonnie served her purpose probably ties in exactly to why Blackbeard knew that she'd be a good target, which shows that Blackbeard definitely thinks pretty hard about which people are worth trading to the government. And if Blackbeard knew about Bonnie's importance, then he could very well know all about Vegapunk as well, since Bonnie ties right into that. And maybe even he knows stuff about Kuma, so getting Vegapunk's brain could have just been on Blackbeard's radar this whole time. And why would he trade with the government again after what happened last time? One reason is probably because he got the one Marine that Akainu couldn't be bothered with thanks to what happened at Marineford. Or Blackbeard may just know about Sword because of Aokiji, which would be a crazy twist. And since Garp trained Kobe, Blackbeard probably knows that he's going to be dealing with the more ethical side of the world government as opposed to Akainu, so they're more likely to hold up their end of the deal. Which is exactly what leads me back to Punk Records. Is there anything more valuable for Blackbeard than that? So the way that I see this shaking out is that Sword and maybe some of Vegapunk's creations go to take on CP0, while Vegapunk and his brain leave with the Straw Hat crew to go and help Kobe. And all of this could probably happen because Sword just brings up the Kobe situation to them. But either way, the crew will need to fight or bargain with Blackbeard to get Kobe back. And if the Amazon Lily situation is any indication, Blackbeard isn't even afraid to give up his own crew to get what he wants. So I think a bargain is the likely outcome, because otherwise it's going to be all-out war, which is also on the table, but I feel like that's going to happen later on in the story still. But why would Vegapunk ever be willing to give his brain to someone like Blackbeard? That doesn't seem like a fair trade in the first place at all, does it? Well, there's a few interesting things about that. First off, Vegapunk straight up just needs a place to keep his brain, and obviously Blackbeard wouldn't want to damage it if he's going to use it for the information, so Vegapunk might just rationalize that it's safer to leave it with Blackbeard than elsewhere because he's a Yonko and has actual safe territory. And Vegapunk may just agree to work for Blackbeard in general because Blackbeard has a lot of money at his disposal, I assume. Shoot, maybe Blackbeard exchanges Kobe for money to Cross Guild first, and then uses that to sign Vegapunk to some kind of contract. I mean, if Vegapunk is willing to work for the world government, I'm not ruling out the chance that Vegapunk works for Blackbeard or really anyone else if they have the money. But what's really crazy is what Blackbeard could do with all of Vegapunk's knowledge. Obviously, he'd get all of the Ancient Kingdom information and even some marine intel, but the two biggest things he could get from Punk Records would be Devil Fruit information and Seraphim information. Seraphim's obviously posed a bit of a challenge for Blackbeard back in chapter 1059, and if Blackbeard could either learn to destroy them easily or maybe even control them, that alone could be worth trading Kobe. But what about the Devil Fruit information? Because I think that's where it's going to get really important. Because as I said earlier, Blackbeard is Oda's Devil Fruit guy. I mean, he's the only person in the verse to hold two Devil Fruits at the same time, so what if Blackbeard is looking for even more information on them? And what better place to look for that than what is likely the best Devil Fruit encyclopedia in the entire verse, Vegapunk's brain. Oda told us in SBS 48 that we'd learn all about devil fruits when we meet a certain professor, and I think it's safe to say that professor is Vegapunk. So if Blackbeard can learn all of what he knows, then maybe he can give himself even more devil fruits, or make sure his crew all has multiple fruits, or maybe he will learn to imbue devil fruits into objects like his ship, or even his rings or his guns. And maybe he won't even need the actual fruit to do it anymore. He can just get people's lineage factor to replicate the abilities. That means he no longer needs to go kill people and get a target on his back to pursue certain powers. And he may even learn how to nullify Devil Fruit abilities in general. He can already do that to Devil Fruit users with his own Black Vortex ability, but maybe he can learn how to do it to people permanently. Or as I was saying earlier, maybe he can use that information to undo certain Devil Fruit effects, like on a potential statue of Rox D. Zebek that he wants to turn back into a human. I mean, Oda told us that Blackbeard's hobbies are gambling and historical research, and both of those tie in perfectly to a situation like this. If he weren't a pirate, Blackbeard would be an archaeologist. So getting access to information on the ancient kingdom and the inner workings of devil fruits is probably high on his priority list. And given that Vegapunk proved to us how people can only store a finite amount of information in their brain, getting an almost endless supply of information in the form of Vegapunk's brain right off the bat would be yet another huge shortcut for Blackbeard on his path to become the king of the world. Well, if you enjoyed what I had to say in this video, please drop a like and subscribe because there's plenty more coming down the road. But that's it for this video, so in the meantime, why don't you go ahead and check out one of these two videos that you should probably already see on the screen. Later.